So listen, audience, we promised you guests, and there's more guests. There's more guests because we're talking COVID. Like, this is taking over the sports world. The NHL's on a holiday hiatus. The NFL is postponing games. The Raptors and the Magic, who were supposed to play Monday night, we record on Monday mornings, they had that game postponed because there were a bunch of COVID cases amongst the Magic and the crew of Magic players and staff that were set to travel to Toronto. Baker Mayfield of the Cleveland Browns, who, as we speak right now, is in COVID protocols, but saying he's asymptomatic. So between the time we record, between right now and the time we finish recording, that might have changed because Baker Mayfield at this minute is lobbying to go take a test so he can test negative and play Monday afternoon. But here's what he tweeted December 16th regarding the NFL's COVID protocols. At NFL, make up your damn mind on protocols. Showing up and only making 3 teams test, all so you can keep the game as scheduled to make money. And again, that's Baker Mayfield tweeting that. It's not Colin Kaepernick or Justin Jackson. That's Baker Mayfield railing against the NFL's greed and their lack of regard for player health. So now, if we're talking Baker Mayfield plays for the Cleveland Browns. And if we're mentioning the Cleveland Browns, and you should know who our next guest is, it's Corey Erdman, who is the biggest Browns fan I've ever seen outside of Northern Ohio. Corey Erdman, what do you make, not just of what your favorite quarterback is saying, but of this idea that these sports leagues have decided to institute all these half measures to keep as many games as possible going, even though COVID is running through these rosters?
Well, first of all, considering the topic, and also I didn't know this about Dave being a Ravens fan, I wore the wrong sweater today. Instead, I wore my Rudolph pun holiday shirt to support Notre Dame because the Fiesta Bowl is coming up as well. I found this to be really interesting because one thing that you have to say about Baker Mayfield is he has actually been very consistent on the topic of COVID-19. You might remember there was a preseason press conference where a reporter asked Baker, do you think it's a competitive advantage that your entire team is vaccinated? And he said, competitive advantage? Like, I'm just happy you were all safe and healthy. So Baker has always been consistent on this. What I found interesting, and I don't think has been addressed after what he was alleging, was the idea that only a handful of teams were tested and others were not. Yes. So and another thing to remember is that Baker Mayfield's center, ostensibly his close friend, J.C. Tretter, is the head of the NFLPA right now. So I was wondering, hey, is this Baker Mayfield being kind of a messenger for his pal, J.C. Tretter, who's seeing maybe some issues, a little bit of inconsistencies or a lack of overall testing, and Baker was the messenger for that. But unfortunately, to your point, Morgan, and this will come out way after, Baker will not be playing. This will be the debut of Nick Mullins playing tonight on Monday Night Football.
And this will be the day our man Nick Chubb breaks the 50 carry barrier. Nick Chubb Nick Chubb is going to get 50 carries against like not even an 8-man box. It'll be an 11-man box. The Raiders will just say, look, Nick Mullins, you're not throwing this football. Our whole defense is within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Do what you must, Nick Chubb. We'll wait for fourth quarter Nick Chubb because you'll be exhausted this time. So do your worst. Dave Zirin, help me make sense of this because the NFL is now saying we actually want to scale back testing on players if they're asymptomatic. Even though like what we're learning about Omicron is that Omicron infects unvaccinated people, but it doesn't particularly care if you're vaccinated. It'll get in there too. And even if the symptoms are what folks are calling mild, like mild, I guess, compared to death, you can still get it and you might still spread it to people. But the NFL, instead of saying, let's test more, they're saying if you're asymptomatic and vaccinated, we will test you less. Which I guess makes sense from the standpoint of like trying to keep these games going and trying to keep your stars on the field because people tune in to see Baker Mayfield. No disrespect to Nick Mullins. They don't tune in to see Nick Mullins, but honestly, like back in the real world, like what the hell kind of sense does that make?
Well, first of all, it's nice to do any kind of show without Baker Mayfield being part of a commercial break and interrupting us. And second, it's nice to talk about Baker Mayfield for for 5 seconds without mentioning his injuries, because no one else in the NFL is injured except for Baker Mayfield, as we're constantly reminded. Putting that aside, my God, I just want to say that sports world's doing something very dangerous right now, and it's not just the NFL. In March 2020, the sports world sent a signal, not just to the United States, but to the world. Yes. When the NBA shut down after Rudy Gobert had a positive test, and the NBA and the WNBA went into the bubble. That was a message to everybody that the world has been turned upside down and people have to get ready to live in a new reality. And as horrific as the body count has been for COVID, I believe that the decision by Adam Silver in March 2020 undoubtedly saved lives, particularly given the lack of leadership coming from the White House in the United States. Fast forward to today, December 2021, a very different message from the sports world that's also going to be heard loud and clear throughout society. And that's that the show must go on. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's about the NFL. Yes, it's about profits. Yes, it's about making sure that the season ends. But at the same time, what they're saying to people, the message unmistakably, is that if you are asymptomatic, you need to just go out and live your life. You need to shop like it's Christmas. You can go to the games, and fill the stadiums. Yeah. We want you there. We want business as usual, because asymptomatic does not necessarily mean you have COVID. And what a flagrantly irresponsible message that is. And the people that I feel terrible for, honestly, more than anybody, are team employees. Mm-hmm. Because these rules, let's be clear about this, they've been bargained not just by these aren't fiats by Roger Goodell or Adam Silver. These have been bargained with the players associations in each case. And part of the bargaining is that they're putting it on the player to go up to medical officials if they feel. So rather than testing everybody and trying to figure out who has COVID, who has asymptomatic, they're putting it on the player to be able to go up to team doctors or chief medical officers or whatever they call them in the NFL and say, yeah, I'm not feeling well. And these are NFL players we're talking about. I mean, they could have a bone sticking out of their leg and they'll say it's a bruise. So we're going to count on them to go and say, yeah, I think I have a head cold. Right. To a team doctor when they want to get on that field, when there aren't guaranteed contracts, when they know that it's next man up and that their roster spot could be taken the next day. So, I mean, I find the developments of the last week extremely difficult to process, because on the one hand, the thinking person in me is like, my God, what an incredible dereliction of duty, how shockingly irresponsible this landscape is. And then there's another part of me, and I know we all feel this, that yearns to pretend that this isn't happening again and that we can still enjoy sports, because that does mean normalcy. Mm-hmm. But that involves looking in the mirror and lying to ourselves.
Yeah, David, because there's a part of it where you're depending on players to go volunteer when they don't feel good. But there's also the part of it where people are sick and it's up to them to decide whether or not to tell you that they are symptomatic. Right. And so I've got COVID, but I really want to get on the field. And again, the NFL, this is what we value, this is what we celebrate, like the person that's willing to go get a shot of Toradol before the game so they can ignore, a torn tendon or whatever. And so somebody's got COVID, has symptoms. Oh, I'm sniffing, but that's my allergies. That's not COVID. No, I'm fine. I'm asymptomatic. So you wait for these players to declare themselves asymptomatic, even though they might have a ringing headache or a bad cough. You can blame each symptom on something besides the COVID just to get people on the field.
How can we put the onus on players who are asymptomatic if they don't realize that they're asymptomatic with COVID? Because you don't have symptoms if you're asymptomatic. So if I'm an asymptomatic player, how am I supposed to know that I have COVID to go to the team and tell them, I don't have any symptoms, but I think I have COVID, especially if no one around me has also come to me and said, hey, Megan, I hate to be the one to do this to you, but I tested positive for COVID. I don't know if you have symptoms, but I need to let you know you need to get tested. Like, how do you know if I have my bubble, like if I'm doing what you're supposed to be doing, what people are expecting the players to do. And I apologize that I'm long-winded on this, but I thought of it after I was done my previous comment. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, if I have my little bubble and my bubble is also respectful of me and they're vaccinated and they're testing to make sure they're safe, so that they're trying to help me stay safe so I can keep playing and making paychecks. If one of them tests positive and then comes and tells me, but I don't have symptoms, okay, yeah, it's on me. But if no one around me tests positive, How do I know if I'm asymptomatic if I don't have symptoms?
That's exactly it. And what they've decided is that the precaution, who needs a precaution? It's not like a new variant of this virus is ripping through the population faster than a rumor. Who needs precaution? Dave, what's up?
No, just to say that Megan makes a compelling argument for why there should be mandated testing. And frankly, not only in the NBA, but throughout the sports world. I mean, my wife's a public school teacher. They do mandated testing. They should be doing that in the NBA and the WNBA and every sport, for every sports league, every industry right now, because there's no such thing anymore, I would argue, as contact tracing. We're all contact traced. We all got to be at this point. Right. I mean, in this Omicron, everybody I know either has COVID or has a friend who has COVID. The walls are coming in. And while I'm confident because, people around me are triple vaxxed that we'll be able to fight this and shake it off, and everybody should be vaxxed, I also feel very strongly that we have to be testing people because of asymptomatic folks. And we have to have the argument that really I can't deal with is when people talk about how healthy athletes are. So they should be taking the field anyway, as if there isn't a broader responsibility to team employees, to team announcers like the Megan McPeaks of this world, and to the family members, particularly children under 5 and the elderly who might be, and the immunocompromised. It's like we don't have any, certainly in the United States, I'm not going to speak for Canada, I never do, but any sense of collective solidarity, collective health, collective responsibility. If we had a culture of that in this country and a responsibility of it, the government would be sending tests to everybody's house so they could be in a state of constant monitoring, which is where we need to be at least for the next 6 weeks and we get through flu season.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that, Morgan, because I think what's happening is exactly the opposite of what Megan and Dave just pointed out, where I think we're in a state with such a transmissible variant that at least right now, until we can figure things out on the vaccine end that might be able to fight against this, the weapon that we have against this is constant testing. And instead, we're seeing kind of a push to go the other way, which is basically the game that Florida as a state has run, which is if we don't test and we don't know, the numbers can't go up. And that, exactly. Yeah, maybe enough people are asymptomatic and healthy enough that they don't feel it and they take the field. And whatever comes of that, if we don't know about it, we can't be liable and we can't feel bad about it. And that is an incredibly dangerous precedent that's being set right now.
Just lastly, just want to say that like the message is so important. I mean, never have I felt that sports has a power that it has now. Like I've been arguing for years that sports has a cultural power beyond the field and the court to actually affect conversations, affect how we speak about things, race, gender, sexuality. Sports is a marker. And this is one of those moments. Whereas I would argue that sports actually has the capacity to save lives or not save lives. And I'm very fearful of the course they're taking. And I'm someone who, you throw me a nickel and I'll criticize sports owners. It doesn't take a lot for me to do it. But I gotta say, we would be being dishonest if we did not say there was pressure coming from the players to keep playing because they want to be on the field, and pressure from fans who want to live in the reality where sports are still going on. I mean, so it's not just about, believe me, you don't have to do much for me to demonize Roger Goodell, but the idea that this is just coming from commissioners' offices, I think would be a fallacy in organizing why this is happening the way it is.
Corey Erdman, before we let you go, you were at one of the last big attended events. Were you not in Montreal on the weekend?
So I called that fight remotely.
Okay.
And so, but just some background on some of the chaos that it's even causing, that COVID is causing in the boxing world. That fight that you're referencing, the light heavyweight title fight between Artur Beterbiev and Marcus Brown, they didn't know whether they would be able to even stage it the morning of the fight, because the day before the Montreal Canadiens game in the same venue was held without fans, and the Montreal Canadiens game the day after the fight was canceled entirely. So up until the morning of that fight, we didn't know if the fight was going to happen. I called it remotely, but both of my producers that I would normally work with at the studio both tested positive for COVID. So in order to call the fight, I had to go in and rapid test before I went on the air. And if I tested positive, I think there just would have been a Nat soundtrack
It would have been
over that fight on ESPN. So it's causing a lot of problems in my world as well.
It would have been Steve Molitor calling those fights solo, like
That's right.
Colonel
That's
Bob
right.
Sheridan, one-man broadcast team. All right, Corey, before we let you go, tell the people where they can find you in between episodes.
You can find me on the airwaves, as Morgan described, popping up in all sorts of places. You can often find me on ESPN Plus and Box Nation and Sky Sports. But written stories, you can find those from me every morning on boxingscene.com every Monday morning. So you can follow me on Twitter as well at Corey_Erdman.
Perfect. All right, Corey, we'll see you soon. I'll be back in your DM soon talking about whatever. Stick around for this next topic because Corey knows, like, the next topic, I have not been able to get enough of this thing. But guys, that was Corey Erdman, columnist at boxingscene.com, one of the best boxing commentators out there on either side of the border.